We're going around the HBCU landscape, hitting every single school, and we start off with the biggest winners of the week, Jackson State. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey's over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com to get started. And if you're new to FanDuel, put down a $5 bet and you get $200 back in bonus bets. Just go to FanDuel.com to make every moment more. We're going around the HBCU landscape for the first time ever on Locked On HBCU. Feels a tad bit overdue, but here we go. We'll wrap it up with the SWAC West. In the middle, we'll look at the MEAC and the couple of teams that defected from the MEAC now in the CAA. But we kick it off with the SWAC East. Tennessee State will also be at the end of the show with the SWAC West. But we started off with the SWAC East, and you have to kick it off with the biggest victors of the week, and that is Jackson State, because of their victory over FAMU, they now have the SWAC in their hands. This does still feel like a SWAC championship game early. It really does. So it's hard for me to say that anybody is the favorite out of the Southwestern Athletic Conference to represent them in the Celebration Bowl other than Jackson State. They not only have the head start as far as who is the best, they have the head start as who is going to represent the SWAC East. So FAMU needs them to lose twice. So it's a little bit different now. It's a little bit different. And Jackson State knows that if they beat Alabama State, you have to still win out. But if you beat Alabama State, I think that we can go ahead and cement Jackson State as representing the SWAC East. I think that we can say that at least. Then you go on to FAMU, the team that they beat, and they're looking at Alabama State to beat Jackson State, because what they need is for it to be a three-way tie. They need for them to be the only team with one loss. And I don't think that you get a three-way tie if Jackson State beats Alabama State. I don't think that they lose two other games. And I just don't. It's going to be difficult. I think Alabama State winning and then hoping Jackson State slips up at some other point is your best bet if you're FAMU. But one good thing I got out of the Rattlers game is that they're discovering Ace Cobb. He scored 2 touchdowns in each of the last 2 games. I think they've been relying on Jamari Gassett a lot. If you can get Ace Cobb more involved in the passing game, I think that will be a good thing for the Rattlers moving forward. Now, Alabama State, because you got to go to the top 3. Yeah, that's how you have to start off when you're looking at this conference. If you're looking at Alabama State, I don't think that there's anybody, right? I don't think that there's anybody who's ever had a better bye week than Alabama State had this week. Of course, they're going to be going into the Magic City Classic against Alabama A&M this upcoming weekend. But if you're looking at a time where you get to sit back, watch the games, you're sitting on your couch, and you're watching one game in particular, Jackson State versus FAMU, you want Jackson State to win, and you probably wanted them to not win by too large of a margin, because you have to remember the tiebreakers come into play. And if you're a defensive team, you want to have the smallest obstacle possible. And by that, I mean, you want to be like, okay, they have to win by 16. But if they had to win by 30, that would have been tough. So I think Jackson State won by just enough for you to feel like, all right, this is somewhat doable if we put on a really good offensive performance against Jackson State. They have to win by 16 or more in order to win a 3-way tie between Jackson State, FAMU, and Alabama State. Now to who Bama State is going to be playing this weekend, Alabama A&M. Xavier Langford, since he's taken over for Cornelius Brown, has really looked good. He's put up some really efficient, good numbers. Against Jackson State, he was a big part of that comeback surge. Obviously, it stopped short, but he was a big part of that. And you look at his game, he had over 300 yards in that game. He had 3 touchdowns through the air. I hope I didn't just confuse his yardage as far as last game and this game, but I believe it was 345 yards. One was 215, one was 345. But you're looking at Langford over the last 2 weeks when he's really started. Now he's really been able to throw the football, which he wasn't doing before that. You're looking at what? 560 yards, 7 touchdowns, both through the air and on the ground. If you combine them, he's had a really good couple of weeks as the starter, and we'll see if that momentum is able to carry over into the Magic City Classic. I think that that's going to be a really big thing for them, that defense versus Xavier Langford. But I'm going to get into that on tomorrow's episode. So I don't want to go too far in depth on that. That will be one of our games to watch. That is not our game of the week, the Magic City Classic. But over the last 2, against Jackson State, against Bethune-Cookman, against Jackson State and against Bethune-Cookman because they had a bye week, Xavier Langford has shown he is the starting quarterback. He's performed the best out of anybody, and he's been really high in touchdowns. The first week he had 3 touchdowns through the air. This past week, or the 12th, because they had a bye week, the 12th, he had 1 through the air, and he also had 3 touchdowns on the ground. So being able to get it done in multiple formats, I think is a really big deal. Then the last one, I'm going to combine Mississippi Valley State and Bethune-Cookman because there was two very impactful SWAC East matchups this weekend. There was one at the top of the conference and then one at the bottom of the division, right? At the top of the division, you're looking at Jackson State versus FAMU. It's Mississippi versus Florida. And then at the bottom of the division is Mississippi Valley State versus Bethune-Cookman. Now, at the top, you have Mississippi. They came out as the victors. At the bottom, you have Florida coming out as the victors with Bethune-Cookman. This was a very low-stake game. I'm being a little bit funny, probably not that funny, probably not as funny as I think I am. But I'm being a little bit funny as far as Mississippi Valley State versus Bethune-Cookman. But this was a game for the worst team in the conference. That's genuinely what this was. I don't think that there's anybody on the West who is a worse team than either of these two. And they fought it out, and Bethune-Cookman came out with the win. So I guess they get second place in this. But Mississippi Valley State looks like the worst team, guys. I know that I dogged them a lot. I know that I dogged Mississippi Valley State a lot, and I've become a little bit more aware of that. And I'm trying to do it less. But when it comes to football, they just haven't been good. And Bethune-Cookman hasn't been this year either. We'll see if that sparks something. But so far, Bethune-Cookman hasn't been great. We're going to take a break from the SWAC for a minute. Then we're going to get into the SWAC East, the SWAC West a little bit later. We're going to get into the MEAC because I want to make sure that we separate, and we'll probably play with the order because this will be something that we're doing on a weekly basis. So this week we're going SWAC East, MEAC, SWAC West. Next week might start off with the SWAC West. Next week might start off with the MEAC. Who freaking knows? I don't, so I know that you don't. But one thing I do know is that we're going to get into the MEAC as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is the only place that I would suggest you go if you're looking for employment or if you're looking for a new employee, right? Small businesses, a lot of times, they don't even go anywhere else. They don't even venture anywhere other than LinkedIn. So what this means for both sides is follow their lead because they understand there's a reason that 86% of people who are looking for employees find the right person for their job within the first 24 hours. LinkedIn is the place that you need to be. That is the space in which you will find the best candidates for your vacancy. So if you're a small business owner, take advantage of that. But then if you're looking for the job, stay on LinkedIn, be active because at the end of the day, that's where they're all at. And if we all understand, hey, this is where the employer's at, this is where the employee's at, now we're all here mixed together and we're all on LinkedIn.com. We're all on LinkedIn.com. And like I said, 86% of small businesses, they find the right candidate for their job within the first 24 hours. So go ahead and boost that number a little bit by going to LinkedIn.com. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Saints. I'm gonna go with the usual. Go with the home team. That's my squad now. But go ahead and go to Locked On Saints because my guy Ross Jackson is breaking down all of the biggest news, including Spencer Rattler continuing his stretch of starting as Derek Carr is out. However, let's continue going around the MEAC. We done changed regions, right? We were down there in the Floridas, we were down there in the Mississippis, but now we moved up to the Georgia. got any Georgia teams? I'm tripping. You got you got in the North Carolinas, you got in the South Carolina. So you're in the Carolinas and all of that. I'm thinking about Morehouse going to the MEAC. Talking about we in the Georgias. But anywho, most of the MEAC had the week off. Most of the MEAC did not play last week. The only two teams who had a game were South Carolina State and Hampton. That was it. Hampton played Tennessee State, and then you're looking at South Carolina State playing Fort Valley State. That was it. So they didn't even go against each other. But MEAC play does kick off this week. We'll start off with the two teams that actually played a game, and that is South Carolina State and Howard. When it comes to Howard, man, I'm still waiting for them to really activate both of their running backs in the same game. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here. I feel as if I'm beating a dead horse because I keep saying, let's get Jared Hunter and Eden James going in the same game. And I can't keep coming on and saying the same thing over and over and over and over again. But this does feel like a prominent time to highlight we need to get Eden James and Jared Hunter going if we want to see some good football. If we want to see some good football, I need them to do that, right? And I say we as a fan of both of those guys. I think they're really good, talented running backs, and they deserve a little bit more attention. Specifically, Eden James. You can tell they're going to prioritize Jared Hunter, which you have to prioritize one, and I'm not shocked that it's Hunter. I think next year will be James's year. But come on, man. There's too many games where he's not hitting 7 carries. That's unacceptable. I think half of his games, he hasn't hit 8 carries. I know he's only hit 10 carries twice. I would love to see Hunter and James hit 10 carries in a game, but that's only happened twice against Princeton and Morehouse, I believe. And Morehouse was a blowout. Like this, I think it's unacceptable. But you look at Jay-Sean Scroggins, he's going to average 13 carries a game. Maybe we need to tell him to stop running as much. Maybe we need to lessen that and boost up the Eden James carries. Maybe we need to not have RPOs and just have straight handoffs. You're not reading. You're just, I don't know, but it just feels like a missed opportunity when you have these two talented backs and you're only really feeding one of them. Scroggins against Tennessee State really struggled through the air. 6 of 21 for 33 yards. That's bad, right? That's less than 2 yards an attempt. So I don't expect him to be that bad again, but he had his struggles. That's the type of game in which you want to lean on a running game, though, man, and do it early. You do it early before you're in a situation where you have to pass the football. Then you go to South Carolina State. They knocked off Fort Valley State, which is not new to Chennis Berry. He's done that the last couple of years when he was at Benedict. But this feels like the moment for them. There's a lot of hype around South Carolina State. There's a lot of hype around South Carolina State in the sense that people are beginning to believe. This is year one for Chennis Berry, but that's not stopping the hype train. That's not slowing anybody down. There's a lot of believers in the Bulldogs. So with that hype mixed with the fact that they have North Carolina Central coming next week on Halloween night, I could easily see this Delaware State game being kind of a trap game for South Carolina State, being a game that they kind of overlook because they know they have Central coming next week, and this is kind of like a battle for the top dog in the conference. But if you want it to remain that, you have to defeat Delaware State. You cannot slip up, and you cannot overlook the Hornets. Do I think Chennis Berry will do that? No, I don't. Because of the type of coach that he is, he doesn't really strike me as an overlook the opponent type of guy. But let's get into their opponent because we looked at Howard, we looked at South Carolina State. Now let's look at Delaware State. Delaware State has been a very gritty team. That's the thing that I'll say about Delaware State. That's how they've been discussed in out of conference. Been like, oh man, they were close against Sacred Heart, or did they beat Sacred? I don't know, man. They were close in a couple of games. As we go through it, it's sometimes a little bit more difficult for me to remember every single one of their games, but you're looking at they were gritty against this team, or specifically Hawaii, or we're Delaware State is the team that you're looking at and saying, I'm taking good things from that game. That was an L, but we're going to take something from there, which I think is great. I'm not going to undervalue that, but it's only great not a conference. Once you get into the conference, all of that goes out the window. I don't want gritty. I don't want, oh, you're a tough out. Like, I hear those things about certain schools and people use it as compliments. To me, you say that 3-4 times, it's no longer a compliment. It's now changing to you don't really know how to win. You can keep it close, but you're not going to win. I'm not here for the moral victories, and I don't think Delaware State is either. They had a strong start to the season where people were talking about them in a certain light. If they want to maintain that, they have to start winning some games in MEAC play. This is not me nagging. This is not me fussing or anything. This is not me even doubting. This is just saying the reality of the situation. Delaware State has to win to continue the hype that they currently have going into MEAC play, if there's any left. If there's any left. That felt like it was 2-3 weeks ago. If there's any residual, you got to win games. Got to win games. Let's go to North Carolina Central. I don't know why we took so long to get to them. North Carolina Central. This is the king of Black college football. This is the team that, if you're looking at the rankings, which we did on yesterday, remember, if you are an everyday or maybe you missed yesterday's episode and you're wondering why are we not talking about the rankings on Wednesdays like we normally do? Well, that's because we did it on Tuesdays and we're changing up our schedule to where we have rankings on Tuesdays and we have around the HBCU on Wednesdays. So just something to remember. This is a little bit different. I'm gonna post a clip on Twitter. Right? I'm going to post a clip on Twitter, or it already be posted by the time that you've heard this. But I just want everybody to understand exactly what we're doing moving forward. We're going to do around the HBCU on Wednesdays. But North Carolina Central has their crown. They have their crown, and I think that they've earned it. The funny thing about the MEAC having such a small conference is that they have a large out-of-conference schedule. And everything that you do in out-of-conference, it's 5 games. It's a large sample size. You can start ranking. You can start talking about these teams with a little bit more concrete knowledge. I don't think that happens with the SWAC. When it happens in the SWAC, it really depends on how good your out-of-conference schedule is. But in the MEAC, you get 5 games. You have a comfortable out-of-conference, and I feel like I can talk about each one of these teams as we enter conference play. But at the same time, it's important to note that none of it matters. If North Carolina Central comes out and they lose the next game or two, right? No one's going to say, well, they did beat Campbell, so they are that ain't going to get you the MEAC crown. Beating Campbell could be the best victory of any MEAC team all year. If North Carolina Central loses 2-3 games in the conference, you can't lean back on that. It's just not possible. So it's time for them to show that they are king to those who they must be king to. And that's the thing. I think that North Carolina Central has shown themselves to be king in the MEAC. They've shown themselves to be the best team thus far. But if you look like the king to the neighboring country, but you don't look like the king to your country, we gonna have a revolt very soon. So we'll be watching. This week they have Morgan State. I think that may be a game that we look at as well. I'm thinking about leaning towards 4 games on tomorrow just for our game of the week's games of the week preview. But anyway, so we've hit Central, we've hit Howard, we've hit Delaware State, we've hit South Carolina State. Let's hit Morgan State. Let's go ahead and go to Morgan. With Morgan, I'm looking at a team that I call them the MEAC Alabama State, but I don't have nearly as much optimism around them. I don't think that they've shown me anything offensively that has given me that. Yes, they put up 50-something points against Virginia Lynchburg, but that's Virginia Lynchburg. It's like the only team I don't give you credit for putting up 50 points on. I'll dog you for not putting up points. And before you try to open your mouth or get into your thumbs and start saying, well, Texas Southern did this, that, and the third against Virginia Lynchburg, I came on and criticized them. So I will not be responding to that. I may respond to that and say you should have listened a little bit farther. It's not too late to delete that comment. I haven't seen it yet. But yeah, I don't know, man. I think Morgan State is meant to play spoiler. I don't know if Morgan State is meant to achieve high heights this year, but I could definitely see them as a team who upsets a top dog, whether that is North Carolina Central this upcoming week, whether that's a Howard, whether that's a South Carolina State. I think that I could see them upsetting a team and putting a lot of tension in the air of, well, now we have to be perfect because we have such a small conference schedule. But I don't see them being a team that runs the table. I don't see them as a team that rattles off a couple of big-time victories against a couple of big-time opponents. That does not feel like what's in the play for Morgan State as we enter MEAC season. And I hate that because I really do like Morgan State, and I like their style of football, which is defensively. I like their style of football. Now you look at Norfolk State as we close out the conference. It's been a few weeks since Jalen Daniels had his injury. But one thing I thought that was interesting is when he was out, they didn't bring Otto Coons in. When he was out, they did not bring in Otto Coons. Instead, they went for Vincent Berry. Vincent Berry was the guy who came in and played quarterback. I thought that was very noteworthy. I thought that was something that stood out to me. I think that as they go into conference play, Jalen Daniels will be back, but I don't know. I think so. We have to see how severe that head injury is. I haven't got a chance to check out the MEAC. They don't even put their MEAC press conference out until Thursday. But yeah, so that's the way that I'm looking at this. And I thought that Barry performed well. He performed efficient. He was 16 for 31, 221 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. Daniels may be back, but if you can get that type of performance with a really good run game, you may be able to pick one off on Howard now. Just a little talking point. Just thought I'd put that out there. Hampton and North Carolina A&T went against each other. Excuse me. With Hampton, they got their first CAA victory of the season. They had a couple of tough matchups, 2 top 25 teams that are within the conference, and then they got an easy one against North Carolina A&T. It's going to be somewhere in between for the rest of the year. We'll see if they're able to fill it out. I don't think we're getting hype about this, but let's move into North Carolina A&T because they're quick and easy too. The greatest homecoming on earth was the greatest whooping of the season for them. Tied for the greatest, right? Right there with their rivals, North Carolina Central. This has not been great. This has been bad. This is questioning. I like to give coaches 3 years, but we're questioning Vincent Brown's ability to build this program already. We're questioning whether or not he is the right guy for the job. These answering questions about this. Players are declaring for the transfer portal in the middle of the year. I don't see that regularly. To me, that's embarrassing. To me, that's saying, look, this is already the ship is already sinking. The ship is already sunk. I'm gone, period. I don't know if he'll still play, but saying you're going to enter the transfer portal before the season is over is insane to me, and it's just a representation of where North Carolina A&T is. Speaking of where everything is, Southern is in a way different place than they were a week ago. Let's get into that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. Go to FanDuel.com to get started now. If you're new to FanDuel, put down a $5 bet, get $200 back in bonus bets, and then you'll be able to go get ready for your next one, right? The NBA is back. We had tip-off last night. It's time to get it cracking. Now, if you're making some money on the NFL, more power to you. If you're making some money on the MLB because the World Series is here, more power to you. If you're making money on the NBA, more power to you. If you're making money on the NHL, if you're making money, more power to you. All right. But I hope that you're making money on FanDuel. Like I said, if you're new and you haven't come here before, go to FanDuel.com, put down a $5 bet, and you get $200 back in bonus bets. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com to make every moment more. As wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Just a little sing along as we wrap up today's episode, as we go around the HBCU, wrapping it up with the SWAC West and starting with the team that is at the top now. That is the Southern Jaguars at the top. And I think that the SWAC West is going to be a little bit looser. They have a big game against FAMU. I don't know if they win that game. They aren't the favorites. I don't predict them to win that game, but they could lose it. Alcorn still has to play Jackson State. Alcorn still has to play PV, right? They haven't played PV yet, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, they haven't played PV yet. Like, they still have some teams that they have to face off against. So I think that the SWAC West is going to be a lot more loose than the SWAC East. I think that the margin for error is a lot larger in the SWAC West. I think that you can lose 2 games and still win this division, which is why I'm not ready to rule out Grambling. Then as far as Alcorn, this is a tough blow. Losing to Southern is a tough blow for a team that gained a lot of steam. They gained a lot of steam over the last, I'd say, 3 weeks or so. You beat Grambling. The first 2 weeks, you play UAPB and you play Mississippi Valley State, and you're putting up points. I'm talking about you're putting points on the board, which was the biggest question for you. Are you going to be able to generate points offensively? That was answered through the first 2 weeks, but through the last 2 weeks, it hasn't been great. Things get muffled when you win. Things get muffled when you win. So Alcorn, they put up big-time performances, 40-point performances against UAPB, 40-point performance against Mississippi Valley State. Then you go against Grambling. You don't put up 40 points. You don't put up much for real. You put up 17, but you come out with a victory. So because of that, we're not really talking about it, and you had a really clutch drive at the end of the game. But now I'm looking at 17 points versus Grambling. I'm looking at 14 points versus Southern. You're really not getting the offense going. You aren't. And against Grambling, it was a bunch of shot plays. It was big plays. I'm not loving it, but you had to come down to earth eventually. Let's see if they can put up 20-some-odd points in a given week. We'll see that this upcoming week. 20 points is the goal. I'm looking for 20, I'm looking for 20 to 24 points out of Alcorn. If I can get that on a regular basis, maybe a couple of high teens, and you're feeling like, okay, my defense is solid enough, we're going to keep some things tight. Okay, cool. You can beat a couple of the SWAC West teams. Like I said, man, I don't think Southern's going to run the table. Alcorn still has life. They do. They still have life. They could lose to Southern, can lose to FAMU, and they could lose to Grambling. I say that without looking at the rest of their schedule. If they lose those two games and maybe lose another one, not maybe, but if they lose those two games and lose another one, that opens up the door for Alcorn to lose to Jackson State and still win the conference. Now, Grambling, Bull Hargrove, come on now. I've been looking for the Grambling running backs. I've been looking for the Grambling running backs to do something, and Bull Hargrove finally. There was a Bull reference there. I'm not gonna make it because I think I was gonna butcher it, but Bull Hargrove is finally showing up. Bull Hargrove. He went up and put 75 points, 75 yards on the board. He has 7.5 yards per carry. He didn't get a lot of touches, but you make the best of it. This is the first game he's had over 70 yards since facing Jackson State. And I've been really looking for the Grambling running backs to do something. This week, Hargrove, Bradford, Talbert, they all put up a touchdown on the board. So that was big. And it allowed Miles Crawley to just kind of sit back, throw for less than 200 yards, be efficient, be calm. And I know that that's going to be the recipe for Grambling if you look at how Mickey Joseph wants to play. He wants to keep pressure off of Miles Crawley, and his preferred way of doing that is to run the football. So if Talbert, Bradford, Hargrove can have good games, put points on the board, that'll be a recipe for success for Grambling moving forward. Now, UAPB, I was a little bit surprised that Javonni Gibson didn't get more explosive plays. He had one play of over 20 yards. I think it might have been the only play over 10 yards for him. And I was a catch and run for 30, right? Grambling allows a lot of explosive plays. That's been their Achilles heel. So I want to salute them for that. Good job to Grambling's defense. But I was a tad bit surprised. Even with the targets, Gibson only got 2 targets deep. One up the right side, one up the left side. But his one big play was a catch and run. It wasn't even one of those. So that was a tad bit surprising. He still has 6 for 84. Still a good game. Don't get me wrong. He still was productive. But I thought that he would have had over 100 yards with a couple of big plays, specifically a couple of shot plays. But that really didn't happen in this game. So that was probably the most surprising thing from Grambling versus UAPB. Now let's look at Texas Southern. I'm not feeling good about them. Since the PV game, I haven't felt great. They felt very dim. I'm not very interested in them, to be honest. I'm looking for more. That game against Southern that you really choked away completely altered the way that you're being looked at. Because now all the games that are close is like, oh, well, you just couldn't finish. Because now you didn't finish in a game against a SWAC opponent. It was different when you're facing a top 25 team, and I'm saying you're down these pieces. But now I'm like, oh, maybe you just can't finish. That's a real thing. Teams don't know how to finish. And it doesn't matter who they're facing. They just can't finish. That could be Texas Southern, and I really hope that it's not. Prairie View A&M is an afterthought in this conference. They're not playing a conference game this week. They're not, right? They played UAPB before their bye week. That was on a Friday night, so it was isolated. It was late, super late. The game didn't even finish until 11 o'clock. The week prior to that, they had another out-of-conference game, and they beat Grambling the week prior to that, but it just feels like so long since you played a Friday or Saturday game in the conference, and you have a 3-loss record already. All of that compiles together to be an afterthought. People aren't really thinking about you because you're not playing conference opponents, and you don't seem to be towards the top of the conference. Sorry, PV is an afterthought in this conference to me. Then lastly, you have Tennessee State. With Tennessee State, they're on the way to the best season in Eddie George's history. The best season in Eddie George's history. They just need for me to finish strong. I talked about this at Links on yesterday's episode. I think that you should go check that out if you haven't. It's segment 3. It's the end of the show. But had some really good talk before that too about the rankings, about what did we kick off yesterday's show with? A whole MEAC preview. So a little bit deeper than this, the 2 games that I'm looking for going into the season. But Tennessee State just has to finish strong. They have to win 1 game to have the best season in Eddie George's career, both in conference and overall. You just need to win 2, and you'll have 2 to 3 games, and you may have a shot at the playoffs. So they're entering a pivotal stretch. I can't really even reflect. They whooped up on Howard. Shout out to them on that. Their defense looks really good. I think their defense is really formidable. That's something to watch. And if they're able to win this game, not to look forward, they got Western Illinois the following week, the only team that has an undefeated record in the Big South OVC. So that's something I really wanted to watch. But this is Around the HBCU. I had a lot of fun. We'll be back doing this next week. But on tomorrow, we'll be looking at our games of the week that aren't quite the game of the week. I know that we'll be looking at the Magic City Classic, and we'll be looking at Howard versus Norfolk State. Those are 2 games to for sure look out for on tomorrow. So in the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.